Dankjewel.
Is there 3 slides? Well,
All right, guys, welcome. I want to go today a little bit, so we've covered a lot of theory. I want to apply that today a little bit more to an application, to an actual measurement technique that we use in the field. It's called single fiber reflectance spectroscopy. I'll get to the details in a moment. The fun thing about that, at least what I think is the fun thing about it, is that the technique is very simple. It uses only a single fiber, but the data processing, so interpreting the optical data that we get back is actually quite complicated. Up until now, there was an empirical model. So what the researchers did was they ran a lot of Monte Carlo simulations and then kind of came up with some scaling relations. And okay, this reflectance roughly scales with scattering like this and roughly with absorption like that. So they built an empirical model which yeah, a little bit obscures the physics behind it. So it's not entirely clear. So a couple of years ago, we set out to try to well, basically do that again, redo that, see if we could derive a model for this technique that that gives a little bit more physical insight. So that's what I want to talk you through a little bit today. Again, this is about blue tissue. It's a fiber that is placed to a piece of tissue and the properties of this piece of tissue on the therapy. I've listed a couple of terms here that we will encounter. Of course, I assume that by now you're familiar with those, so I don't expect too much time on that. We will be doing is taking a little bit of probabilistic approaches, probability densities, and probability distributions. Like we discussed in the Monte Carlo class, there's basically two approaches that we can take if we want to rely on these probabilities. We can do sampling Monte Carlo to generate many random photon paths and then add these all together cleverly and then use that as an estimation of the reflected signal that we will measure. The other approach is to not do sampling, but try to based on these probability density functions that we now calculate some analytical solutions. That is then the trajectory that we'll be following today. We'll try to go down so. So what does it mean? It means that probabilistic model of light propagations. So we're going to assume again that the scatterers and the photons are like little billiard balls that collide with each other. There's a certain probability of traveling a certain distance. There's a certain probability of interacting. There's a probability of bouncing off into a certain direction, etc., etc., etc. And that way we build up a trajectory, and we can calculate probabilities of a given trajectory. That means that the questions that you can ask and is the likelihood probability of any given photon path. You can draw them and try to calculate. So it's likelihood. You take a set of a path like this that consists of a number of steps. We could ask ourselves what is the distribution of the path lengths that are taken between the collisions. What is the probability of absorption along a given path, etc., etc. Big red stripe here means that I have a couple of slides that are included in your in the thing on the canvas, but I'm not going to go through them. Just to reference some stuff on the probability density functions and joint probability density functions, how to calculate the marginal distributions, etc., etc. But we've covered that a couple of times, so I think we can skip through.
How relevant is this in the sense that I remember from previous lectures, we assumed that there was only a single scatter,
Yeah.
And it was a realistic assumption because generally the scattering efficiency was low, wasn't low.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing like 7 scatters, let's say, which would mean the scattering efficiency is extremely high. Like how common this is.
The single scattering efficiency, so at a given event is low, but that so that means that let's say if it's 1%, that means that of all the 100 photos that will go in here, that 99 will through one of them goes this way.
Yes, but then the probability of it scattering 7 times is extremely low.
Yeah, sure. But, that's you put in a lot of photons. So in the end, it will be a sizable amount that actually does go from near to here.
Yes,
So the probability of this given trajectory is going to be very low. But the signal itself, so I'm going to put fiber here and 5 there, consists of any possible trajectory that goes from there to there.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
So each of them will have a very low probability, but taken all together, you can still get measurable signals.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So we're just looking at probability coming out at that point.
Yeah.
Overall possibility.
And then the step back is not in this slide, but what you will do in the end is try to integrate overall possible paths.
Right.
And the Monte Carlo does that for you by just trying to generate as many as possible and then add them. And, the question for today is how can we, if this one wants to be really difficult, can we simplify the problem a little bit in such a way that we can actually perform that integration over all possible paths. This is the instrument. So like I said, it's pretty simple in its layers. Draw the light source. It's going to be a laser or an halogen lamp. At least it's a light source that emits photons. They're coupled into a fiber, which is connected here to sort of bifurcated fiber. It simply means that you have the fibers just touching each other. So there's 2 fibers here that touch a thicker fiber, the vision fiber. So the light is coupled from here into this fiber. It's injected into the tissue, interacts, and is collected by the same fiber. Then the part that is split. And there's part split to the spectrometer where it is detected. So what will we measure? Of course, we have the characteristics of the light source that we can calibrate beforehand, and then we have all kinds of constituents in the tissue that will determine how that spectrum will be modified. So, this is a pretty extensive list of what you can encounter. So there's of course the famous, the usual suspects like oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin, also melanin can occur in forms of new melanin and pheomelanin, just 2 different chemical forms. And bilirubin, beta-carotene, all compounds with different absorption spectra, which occur in different fractions of the tissue, which all will leave their fingerprint on the detected spectrum. And then, of course, there is scattering as well. What's the general trend of scattering with wavelength?
Longer the wavelength, less the scattering.
Yeah, so it's a decreasing function of wavelength in the visible wave. It's just a decreasing function. So this technique is clinically used. I'm going to show you a couple of. I'm going to show you one example where we actually used it in a clinical study. This is the slot arm. This is the stomach. This is the slot arm. People with chronic reflux. Of course, the stomach is made for stomach acid, but the esophagus is not made for it. So people with chronic reflux will develop can develop some inflammation kind of symptoms here, which is really chronic and can develop into cancer. So that goes through a couple of stages. non-dysplastic perisophagus, which is precancerous state, and then goes into more severe stages. Of course, what we would like to do is catch this early. So if patients have these complaints, then do measurements without necessarily taking out tissue, but still being able to assess where this possible cascade we are. So what is usually done is, so last time we talked about OCT for doing this, but what is usually done is that still is just with a white light endoscope. So the endoscope is brought in, just normal video images are taken, and then the gastroenterologist judges them for abnormalities, and if necessary takes a biopsy, which the pathologist can look at. But the convenient thing about these endoscopes is, we see one here. This is what actually goes down the esophagus, and this is then where cameras and other equipment can be connected. The good thing about these endoscopes is that they have working channels. So the channels are meant, for example, to bring in small instruments, but these are also working channels through which you can put, for example, an optical fiber. So that's why we're so charmed of this technique, because it is so very simple and so very small that we can actually very easily combine it with these tools that we have to use already. So these are some examples of the kind of data that you can get. This shows you reflectance measurements. The reflected light as a function of wavelength taken with two different fibers, two different fiber diameters. I'll explain to you later why that is. And then there were 5 repeated measurements. So these are taken with larger fiber, these are taken with smaller fiber. The idea of having the two fibers is that there are a couple of unknowns in the system which you can cross out if you have measurements. What is then done is that on this reflectance data, a physical model or empirical model is fitted, from which the parameters, the clinical parameters of interest are being derived. You see an example of that fitting here. For a smaller fiber, it works more or less well. Still, for the bigger fiber, the fit and the data do not really overlap. In this case, we assume that it is because the fiber was not exactly in contact with the tissue, but so there are better ones. But that's the general idea. So what we get with the two different fiber measurements are differences in reflections. You can see that, but they also will have differences in measurement depths. That's also a little bit of an advantage. The light launched from and collected by the bigger fiber has a higher probability of getting a little bit deeper. So a little bit deeper. But the main reason of doing that is to reduce normal parameters. So we can fit into the data would ideally yield the tissue parameters. What goes into this fit is, of course, the known spectra of hemoglobin, oxyhemoglobin, bilirubin, like I showed in the previous slide. And what will go in are some assumptions. One of the assumptions, for example, is that indeed the scattering is a decreasing function with wavelength. So instead of fitting scattering coefficients at each wavelength independently, we can force such a model on it to make the fitting more stable. This table then shows the number of parameters in the current model, which is quite an extensive list. Here in yellow are the parameters that were necessary to describe scattering. So the A and the B are the parameters that in this model, the P1, P2, and P3 have to do with the scattering phase function. And then there is a number of physiological parameters that also work. This is a two-layer model, so we have the blood volume fraction for layer 1 for layer 2. We have oxygen saturation for layer 1, layer 2. We have a vessel diameter, effective vessel diameter in layer 1 and in layer 2, and bilirubin concentrations.
All these have been fitted.
These all are part of this empirical model, so these are all things that come out of the fit. Yeah, so what you see, what you see here is as a result of that fit with the ranges around it. In this case, for both tissue types, and this is for the non-spastic bed, and this is for the neoplastic. For some parameters there are differences, for some other parameters there are not. And it turned out that actually this way of discriminating based on the sort of parameters that is actually quite feasible. It has a pretty steep sensitivity, especially RC curve, sensitivity versus 1 area on the curve is 0.94. 1 would be perfect. Halves would be a random choice, so you have to point out the figures. So it's not that bad. So one of these fibers was not in contact. That's why the measurement was not very well, and also I think.
Almost there, but okay.
So that's why the fits that work very well. But on the other hand, if we have the fiber in contact, and if we would press too hard, it would also give us some effects, because so you can imagine if you press your finger to the tissue, you see a whitish ring occurring simply because you push out the blood. So the same thing can happen if you push this fiber to the tissue too hard. You can see controlled measurement where the pressure is actually controlled. You see that you're actually pushing out some blood here, region where there is not much absorption present to the current force. That's what's happening. But here in the water, you also see that if you push hard enough, you will actually push water. So this shows an apparent decrease in light absorption by blood. So it's not that the absorption by blood has changed, but simply because you move blood out of the measurement volume, absorption signal changes. So that is also something that you would have to take into account. Now, Xu, one of our PhD students, actually tried to do that a little bit more systematically. So we used that same complicated model where all the physiological parameters came out, and then tried to extract them as a function of pressure that we applied. So the things you see is, for example, that if you push hard enough, then the blood oxygenation apparently drops, which again is not because oxygenation really drops, but because you are pushing away the blood, which the model does not know. Hemoglobin concentration, same thing. On the vessel diameter, the apparent vessel diameter is fitted from the model as well. So it's harder. That means also. Same thing for water volume fraction. So again, that's a part of water, so water volume fraction. The fat volume fraction not so much, because that is bound in the tissue. So that you don't really push away. I think this is just a control measurement to make sure that you should be stable, because that is not really something that you okay, so this, while this all seems to work, it also raises a couple of questions, and that mainly has to do with the huge amount of parameters and the complications that the model has. So this is then Xu's thesis, and in order to describe the model, he needed 8 pages of his thesis. To introduce all the physiological parameters and then explain how they went into the model. So again, a model with 18 parameters, A to describe the scattering, and then 2 times 3 for the blood, and then fat and can so many parameters that at some point you start to wonder how well would the 20 order polynomial fit. Probably would fit, just in terms of fit quality, would fit just as well. And that would also be an empirical model that describes the data. And that is a little bit the status of this model. So all these things are thrown in, but all with their own scaling factors, and they're all so they're not really put in consistently on a physical basis, but so that bugged us a little bit. So the idea was then to set out and try to get a different form of that model. So simple technique with complicated model. So if we look closer to what actually happens to the photons, to the photon trajectories that we have here. So this is these are photon trajectories from Monte Carlo simulations. In this case, for the fiber that launches the photons into tissue and one that collects them. And what you see here is that, well, of course, they all enter here in the end of tear. So we have an average kind of banana-shaped trajectory. Some get very deep, some have long paths, most of them have some shorter paths. But quite a large volume is probed. If you use the single fiber for both launching and detecting photons, you see a different thing. So the trajectories become more line-like, so to say. It's more like they go in and then they experience a backscattering event and come back. And of course, there will still be some trajectories that are longer and have more complicated paths, but the majority of the paths will have this short periods. So looking at these Monte Carlo simulations, the first thought that occurred was that maybe we can simplify this further by restricting ourselves to trajectories that have one backscatter event and then a couple of and then any number of backscatter events. So that was the first simplification. So briefly, I want to grab back to what the likelihood of the signal is. So that's if we consider a Lambert-Beers law here, so density measured on the backside of the event divided by the density from this Beers law. If you would measure, say, transmittance of 1%, and then in this parallel parlance, we will translate that into 1 out of those photons goes through the tissue. That's 99. So that's the way to calculate. We want to calculate the probability of a trajectory of path, and the recipe is as follows: we break up the event. The event in this case, the photon entering here. We break up the event to sub-events, calculate the probability of each of these sub-events. Assuming that they are uncorrelated, independent of each other, we multiply these probabilities to get the total event probabilities. This specific trajectory. If there is then more than one way to get to the final events, on each trajectory, total. So in case of this, this geometry where we have one launch fiber of A and the detection fiber of B, that the chain of probabilities would be as follows: the probability of traveling to site L, so that's the probability of step L, of step of L1. Then the probability of being scattered at that position, multiplied by the probability of changing direction from S1 to S2, and then the next step in trajectory, so the probability of taking a step of size L2, then the probability of scattering at the end of that step, multiplied by the probability of changing direction from S2 to S3, etc., etc., etc. We trace down this. We trace down the trajectory. Yeah, so we're going to try this part.
Short question.
Yeah.
I perhaps a bit of naively always presume that since we're sort of at least presumed still thinking in like little balls, let's say, that if a photon actually encounters one of the particles, it scatters like by definition. That doesn't really seem right if we're both considering there's a probability of scattering at a position and a probability of scattering to a different direction, as in you see how those two be sort of.
Yeah, so you can. So let's say that the scattering efficiency is 1%. Then you could either say, okay, I'm gonna. Then you could either say it's P f at R1 is then 1%. For this making of this specific trajectory.
Sorry, which one?
So here, so this trajectory is then the probability of taking a step L1, then the probability of scattering at 1. That's what you refer to, I think.
Yeah, and that was I was like, if it encounters particle 1, it scatters by definition at least. But I presume
Yeah, but that's if you have the real rigid the picture of billiard balls pixel. So with what you have actually have here is that that only one in the 100 photons will actually.
okay. I'll just drop the balls.
Yeah, you don't have to be too strict about the billiard ball picture.
Yeah, right. No, I just wasn't still that one. Yeah, that makes sense.
So let's I think we did this already. This is leading up to the absorption coefficient. So if we have a probability of absorption per unit length on the path, then P A times VR is the probability of absorption in an interval, minus PADR is the probability of not absorbing an interval transmission. And if we do that for any number of intervals, then we can calculate the probability of actually going through a set of these intervals, a set of DLs. If there are n segments, then the probability of transmission is the probability of going through one segment raised to the power of n. And from this, by taking the other both sides, assuming that this probability of one single transmission is really small, of one single absorption is really small, then we can experiment. We can approximate the logarithm here, then re-exponentialize to end up with Beer's law, with the form of Beer's law, and that means that the absorption coefficient is identified with the probability of absorption per unit time. So it goes for the scattering coefficient. The scattering coefficient is the probability of scattering per unit. So let's do this. You can read this in slides. We already did this. The same goes for scattering. So if you that's maybe good to say that explicitly for you know. So the efficiency is then the fraction of photons that encounter a particle that is actually scattered. If I look at the specific trajectory, then of course it is a trajectory where the photon has scattered. So what I can do is include this efficiency in the calculations. If you have a suspension of particles, the particles have geometrical cross-section A. The trick you can do is curve a path of some length L through that suspension that precisely captures some of the particles, so kind of like a snake around the particles. Volume V A times L of snake and the number of particles index could be around times L. So the average number of scattering events is then counted by scaling with Q. The efficiency. So Q times rho times 2 times rho. It can be simplified. Scattering function times number of scattering events, the average number of scattering events with US times. In the mean path length between these sequences, then is that simply one part, is then simply divided by one over mu. So 1 over the coefficient is the mean free path length between scattering and mean free path for absorption. Okay. So one thing that relates to what we discussed last time. So if the particles are completely randomly placed, in this case, if they are point scatterers, then the distribution of the number of particles will follow a Poisson distribution. It's the statistical distribution that it only holds for the point-like particles. So what we did last time is we considered bigger particles that were that could not overlap in space. That means that in that case, this distribution will be different. It will not be a Poisson distribution. What we probably have to do is start out with some kind of binomial distribution, which allows you to calculate the probability of a volume being occupied and a volume not being occupied. So it becomes a little bit more complicated. If the concentrations are low, then we can use this point-like particle assumption and have a Poisson distribution. Which means that if the number of particles in the volume follows the Poisson distribution, then the number of scattering events will also follow the distribution. So it scales with the scattering. Then, if you want to calculate the probability of transmission, so basically going traveling in a straight line, that means that we have to calculate the probability of encountering no particles at all. So it means substituting zero. No events at all means calculation. And then again, what we see is that this distribution of this expression becomes a single exponential decay with exponential minus the average number of events or exponential minus the second coefficient. So again, a Beer type expression, same subscription. So both the scattering steps and absorption steps basically follow this exponential distribution. We can use that to just like we did in Monte Carlo to sample step size, calculate the probabilities of step size. So you of course have to properly normalize it in order to make it probability functions. In the US, it uses front as well. This is the probability density function for the mean free path. That means that this cumulative distribution, or probability that the free path falls within an interval ranging from 0 to L. It's like a cumulative distribution function. And also in the same way, calculate the probability scattering scattered free population is the result of the slide. Probability of scattered free population over length L is given by exponential minus the rest times. So in this whole chain of events in the photon path, this is already one probability that we can assign. This is the probability having a step size of length L. So let's apply that to this SFR model. So what we'll do is we'll assume that the photons are backscattered onwards. Also, we'll assume that the anisotropy of the tissue is going to be high in general. This is a valid assumption, which would then mean that most of the light is predominantly forward scattered. So that means that the probability of three times back scattering. So if you want to have light going in and then coming back out, that means that you either have one back scattering event or 2, 3, or 2, 3, 4, 5 in order to make the turn. That the probability of 3 times, 5 times, etc. is negligible compared to only 1 time. Also, what we'll assume, based on just looking at these Monte Carlo simulations, how the photon trajectories look like, is that the propagation takes place along a line. So it's a line intuition that coincides with the means that scattering events occur around that. At some point there is a single next scattering event, and then the photon travels back maybe to the scattering event. And then ends up at the side. So that's, and then first, let's assume there is no absorption. To make it a little bit simpler, we add absorption later. This is, of course, there's of course a lot of simplification. So this will only model part of the true signal. So at the end of today, I'll give you a flavor of the fuller model. But, right. Okay. So again, this is the situation. We have online step lengths, step-free propagations, scattering events in change of direction, and then again step-free propagation. We knew already what the probability of step size was. Mentioned as 1 step. This for 1 for step 2, and then the probability of scattering at a certain location is given by US dx. US was the probability of scattering per unit path length. If you want to get a small section of the path length dx. Then the phase function is used to calculate the probability of scattering to a certain direction. Sequences. But let's first look at simpler applications. So the probability of traveling a certain length L without any scattering at all would be exponential US times L. So, then, given the previous, what would be the probability of traveling a length L with one scattering event here? What do you think? So let's three. We have now three chunks. We have propagation, interaction-free propagation to here.
Right,
There
so
we have scattering.
Minus US 1.
Yeah.
And scatter.
Yeah, and then times. So here we have exponential minus US 1. Here we have US dx. Probability for scattering here, and here we have exponential US. I'm not calling it probability. I try to call it likelihood because it's not necessarily normalized. So exponential US dx here. And of course, these two exponentials are just multiplication. They can be good, so in the end, it's only one single exponential left in there.
Is there no dx?
Yeah, that's why I say likelihood. Because for now, I'm just leaving it out for just a tiny moment. I'll put it back in there. Just to see how stable it is. Because now it comes back. Because this one scattering event can occur anywhere on this path. So if I'm asking what is the likelihood of traveling this length L with one scattering event, then I have to account for the fact that that event can take place everywhere. So that's what I do here. You have to add all these options. So here, integrate over all possible locations of this scattering event here. So then end result is this expression. So this is then this is the true probability of traveling length L with one scattering event somewhere there. So that's times L times exponential. Okay. So now the same recipe for two scattering events. We have propagation-free interaction-free propagation to side number one. So this will give you exponential minus US times one, and then US dx for the scattering here. Then again, so for this particular path, just leave out the axis for once in a moment, we'll give you this sequence of multiplications. Of course, again, here we can group the exponentials together and see that it becomes 1 L US, so US squared. This. And then, if you want to calculate the total probability of having two events, then we have to take into account that event number 2 can take place anywhere from 0 to L, and event number 1 can take place anywhere from 0 up until the location of event number 2. So we have to then perform that same integral. So US prime is grouped exponentials just become constants that can go in front of the and then we have to calculate the second event. The second event from 0 to for the first event from 0 up until the location of something. In that case, we account for all the possible locations. So the net result of that is that US squared, US L squared divided by 2 times this exponential. Okay. Let's go on stubbornly for 3 events. This would be the path probability. And now, the question for you is, can you now calculate for me what to do? What the total probability is of these? Let's go. Any value? Let's scroll too fast because I think the answer is on the next slide. great insights.
And there events we just generalize. We just get mu s times L, 2 brackets to the n over n factorial, then times e to the minus mu s times L.
Yeah, because that's indeed what happens because so for three events you have that event 3 can take place anywhere from 0 to L, and event 2 can take place anywhere from 0 to 3, and 1 can get this cascaded stack of integrals. So one goes from 0 to L, the other from 0 to Z3, and the other from 0. So for 3 events that becomes the power 3 divided by 2 times 3, because the integration is 6. And that indeed generalizes to the power. Okay. So if you plot these, such as just inspect the shape of these curves, this is then the exponential that corresponds to the probability of traveling a length L with 0 events. So calculating the probability of traveling length L with 1 event. Is then the red curve. Gets a problem. Okay, we can make this a little bit more sophisticated by including a probability. So this one was not a probabilistic scattering. We can, because we're trying to force the photons down the line, we can make this a little bit more sophisticated by including the forward scatter probability at each of the events. So µs times pf would then become the probability that it's actually scattered straightly forward. So the expression is modified. Okay, so now then so that is all traveling on a straight line in the forward direction. So now we have to include also the backscatter event. So of course that backscatter event can take place anywhere between 0, so right at the fiber, and somewhere very deep in infinity. So let's take that into account. So we're going to let's set B, the position of set B went from 0 to infinity. So I can so if that's the case, then the length, the total path length will be. So if ZB is the location of the backscatter event, length is 2 times ZB. So take that into account for the integral. So the scattering coefficient is officially the probability of scattering in any direction.
And why is it?
It also includes the forward, so here if you calculate US times Z, let's say, and then you would calculate the probability of the photon can go anywhere. And what we're trying to salvage is the photons that go in a straight line.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I do. So normally you would do that by the phase function. And so PF is basically just some phase function factor. And now the same thing here, D would then be the probability of exactly backscattering. So in order to keep it on the line.
Kind of like the P as 1 as 2.
Yeah, exactly. So PF is then forward and P is reverse direction. Yeah, so that would be the probability basically of one backscatter event and a number of n forward scattering events. So this is within the integral of the class a little bit early on with the factorial, and then this curve and this integral accounts for the fact that the backscatter event can take place anywhere. For the complete signal, we would also have to take into account all possible number of forward stretching events. So this term here within the interval has to be summed over n from 0 to infinity forward spectrum events. So this is the final expression for that. So PV is just the constant spectrum, and the rest is a vector of zero. Now, you can do two approaches. So you can do the summation first and then carry out the integration, or you can do the integration first and then summation, and then the expression for the reflectance or the probability. Reflectance probabilities for one single spectrum event and any number of forward spectrum. So going into the break and then after the break, the question is, can you solve this? Can you do this? I don't care which route you take. So let's have a short break and then we can start working out on the break in between. I don't mind. And then look at the answers in half an hour. Is that doable, you think? Yeah.
I've got a question about the assignment, like assignment 2.
Yeah.
We need to take the first, in part 3, we need to take the first 100 values of mu, which are supposed to represent 0 to 5 millimeters. Are we supposed to take, and if you look at the depth, are we supposed to go from 0 to 1 millimeter, then divide it into 200 steps, and then take the first 100?
No.
Or go from 0 to 2 millimeters, divided in 400, because the rest of it would be different.
What I want you to do is, so you have Z and you have the mu that you recover. It's going to look a little bit like this, and at some point it starts going up because the summation. So we have this mu is E Z and divided by sum of them is the n of PZ. And at some point you get too close to n to the end of the range, so the denominator gets very small and it's not correct. So in the end it goes up. So what I want you to do is just pick so the first 100 or the first 50, that is okay. But pick a set of mu's that correspond to the trustworthy region. And there you take an average.
What the resolution was supposed to be that we need to take? Is it the 0.005 micrometers?
No, was it 5 micrometer? I thought it was 5 micrometer. Yeah, that is representative for normal longitude systems. So you can take 5, you can take 10, that's fine. But
denken. Dit model een beetje. Je hebt dan die termen hè, van de kans dat je een bepaalde scattering hebt op één plaats en op de kans dat die bepaalde kant op gaat. Heb je dan ook in die modellen dat je bijvoorbeeld zegt van ja, ik heb heel algemeen, ik heb een vloeistof, ik zeg in bloed, weet je, en dat bestaat uit 50% één stof A, zeg maar 50% stof B. En als je dat dan gewoon die verdeling meeneemt, dan denk ik gewoon.
Dat kan wel. Dus hier toevallig niet zo. Dus, ja, je kan het op twee manieren doen. Je kan het proberen je zou het heel specifiek kunnen doen door echt verstoring aan 1 en verstoring aan 2. Of je kan het in de op, en dat is de meer gebruikelijke manier, is om in die op de cijferschappen te proberen te vangen. Dus als je zegt van ik heb bijvoorbeeld 50% of wat zegt 20% bloed en 80% weefsel, is dat je dan een US maakt die 20% die van bloed is en dan 80% die van weefsel. Dus dat je het in die ene kant met een soort effectieve US werkt en met een effectieve aanspreekfunctie.
What did you guys discuss?
We just discussed the tasks. And updated
Right. Follow-ups or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to finish the production today.
The articles. No.
Yeah.
I have no issues in consider organic use and like how these things. But thing is, right? So I try to do the thing where R doesn't put together, it's just a very small thing, or like very small, not even that small. I just don't like meter. Still doesn't fucking piece of shit code. It literally doesn't. Like his code is just very good. So I'm just gonna try. Actually, I got PTSS flashbacks to when I tried to. Well, because suddenly I was reminded that I actually tried something like this using like real min, which is like the smallest value, which is like not zero or whatever. I still get same issues. So maybe there's some like lower bound where it still works. Like 5.2 instead of like 1. But I mean, if that's the difference, that would be ridiculous. Yeah.
So that we can finish the code as soon as possible because we also need to write a result section. And then
Right. Yeah.
kind of hard without anything.
Yep. I wonder if the assignment was the same last year because I know from, for example, Evo's group that he just came up with some assignments, but like he didn't actually try to do them themselves, right? They were just new assignments, and he just presumed that people probably solved them. But I got strong vibes that I don't know, this hasn't been tried last year because I presume most people aren't like great programmers. I'm not a great programmer, but like I should be able to do it, right? I've done enough programming in my life, but I just can't get it to work. Very frustrating. And also like with the interface, like he was like, oh, that's like too much work in it. I was like, how low is your standard? Like, shouldn't you be like enthusiastic, about people actually putting in effort?
Yeah. I think it's just because of the comparison.
Yeah, maybe it could be.
But if you really can't vote, just send me an email.
Yeah, I think I'll discuss with the speaker today, but it's not eventually working but like that. Nice. I'll send you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then see how execution goes.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously. It doesn't work. I can totally see how this works for like the other groups. If you see like static. I get the same sometimes. Instead of, I used to get the same vibe. I mean, they must run into probably. So simple. That's fine. Oh, yeah. Yeah, nice. Maybe. Yeah, okay. So
Okay, did you get anywhere?
yeah, remember. Easy to get.
Just getting warmed up. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I want to break it down. So the first method would be to do first the summation and then the integration. So this is the expression we started. So first the summation. This has a standard geometrical sum, I think, or whatever. But the sum of x to the power raised to the power n divided by faculteit is exponential x. So we can refactor this part as an exponential term. Like this. Then of course the integration can be carried out pretty straightforward. So we can group these two exponentials with us in both terms. So we have us times 1 minus pi. Then carry out the integration. Convenient substitution, and then we have here one. So the end result is this. Straightforward the probability, the single probability of having n arbitrary n from scattering events. One that second event. EV minus divided by 1 minus P. What's the biggest surprise in this equation? Yes, there's no scattering coefficient anymore. It has to do with the fact that this medium is semi-infinite. So ultimately, all the photons have to escape again. If that is the case, it really does not matter at which rate they scatter. So, the situation will change if we introduce absorption. Then the absorption coefficient gets in there, and also the scattering coefficient comes back. In this case, where there is no absorption, their strength of scattering is not there.
So you know that the probability is there any way to make PF equals 1, or is it going to be?
Yeah, equal 1 is going to be really hard. So it depends on the particles, of course. So if the particle is really big, then it can get pretty close to 1. So for blood, it was 0.999. So it's pretty close with that. Actually, getting really to 1 is probably. So the second method obviously has to yield the same results. So first the integration and the summation. So to do that, we can first take the summation out of the summations part. Like this, and now we have again a standard expression. Standard expression for something to the power n multiplied with the expression integrated is the definition of the effect. So we can use that to substitute back and the faculties drop out. And we get this. This is actually also quite a nice result in the sense that it shows you how it simply scales with the number of, so again, the scattering coefficient is brought out here because there is no absorption. It will just show you simply how it scales with the now this is again a standard sum. Sum of with our n is 1 over 1 minus x, so it becomes 1. So that's the same result. But again, so before we add absorption, I want to look a little bit closer to this PF and PV parameters. So we have to assign some value to that if you want to do calculations for it. So what we assumed in the model is that they will depend on the acceptance angle of the phi. So if the NA, the acceptance angle of the phi was really small, then both in launch, the launch photons will be more or less straight direction, but it will also only accept photons that are on the sizes. So we will assume that only photons that scatter, that have their scattering that's limited to the NA, will be detected. So that means that the PF and the PV are then in practice are going to be defined as follows. So if we have a certain phase function here on the polar plot, then PF is going to be the integral of that phase function of the 0 to the numerical magnitude in the forward direction, and backscatter coefficient as well. Backscatter fractions are the integral of the phase function. Also, other opening of NA for this specific calculation, so this is a B phase function for a 150 nanometer particle with red light. Performing these integrals shows you that the forward scattering, the forward probability is 6%, but the probability of back scattering is a order of magnitude. So you can try to analyze a couple of properties from that. So if we take one of the intermediate results here for the probability of detecting the signal with only one backscattering effect. But this integration sums of the path length. That means that whatever is within the integral is actually the distribution of path length. So we can isolate that. The distribution of path lengths in this zone from that we can, for example, calculate. We have to normalize it to make it a true probability distribution. So it's a pretty factor here. But then we could, for example, calculate the average path length of these photons. The 1 over US times PF, the average probing depth, because this is the average path length, the average probing depth, strapped on the line, would be half of it. So that gives you an idea of how deep this technique can look down. So that the scale with the scattering coefficient will also depend on the forward scattering coefficient. So it does not. It does not. This expression as it is does not contain the absorption scattering coefficient because medium was semi-infinite, there was no absorption, no loss mechanism, so all the photons eventually will escape. So this is then what you calculate here is that the fraction of the escaped photons, so they will all escape, but this is then the fraction of the escaped photons that are captured again by the fiber, and the fraction of the photons, and also the ones that only had one backscattering. So, if you want to know at absorption, then we can factor it in, so we can do the same analysis, the same calculations again, but now yes, the probability is that the photons either scattered or absorbed. So there are two possibilities. Then the probability of scattering is by this way. So this is the scattering coefficient divided by the scattering coefficient plus the absorption coefficient. This one has a symbol, alpha, it's scattering beta. You can count a single scattering. Now the easiest way to include that is to incorporate it into this scaling relationship. So we have scaling with the forward scattering probability. We can now weight probability of scattering is weighted in beta absorption expression. So we can include the alpha here in the summation. So both here for the single backscattering event and for all the forward scattering events, and then the result simply becomes this. So we get this extra factor alpha here in the expression. Now we have again the dependence back on the scattering coefficient. So this is how we put the absorption. Now that also, of course, changes the average proton depth. Instead of only the US here, we have this average proton depth will also be affected by the absorption coefficient. Yeah, so the summary of this, basically the simple part of the model is that assume that the photons are backscattering only once, so that propagation can be approximated. Propagation can be approximated as it's taking place on a 1D line. Then this simple model comes out. So to calculate backscatter probability, forward scatter probability from the phase function, but then this simple result turns up. And we can make that a little bit more complicated by including absorption. It's not a good slide. Okay, so if you want, you can make it even a little bit more complicated by including more backscatter events. So we started out by saying the probability of having 3 backscatter events is really low, and the probability of having 5 backscatter events is even lower. That is true, but for argument's sake, we can try to calculate what happens. So this is for the result that we had for 1 backscatter event. Here, if you would include 3 backscatter events, based on absorption scaling simply because it will scale with the probability of backscatter power. So in the end, it will just only modify the denominator of the expression. Backscatter probability of the third power. And for n backscatter events, we have to of course we have to take into account that the summation is not it is not an that we only have the even number of backscattering events, 1, 3, 5, etc. So 2 n percent. We want to put that in the summation. We can do that. So we can an even amount of backscattering events, any amount of forward scattering events, and then sum these over 0 to infinity. So there's this. The next summation works on the backscattering events. So and then see that the original expression here is modified by this extra term that only contains good thing of this is, of course, that this term here allows you to assess how good the approximation is. The backscatter probability is in the order of 4 in the previous example, then this would be 10 to the power minus 8. This factor really does not do anything. The original shows foremost is that the original assumption of only one batch scattering rate is okay. For completeness, we can include absorption in that expression as well. So then a bunch of alphas appears again. So this is we have already now. Okay. Just so what I want to show you in the next couple of slides, and that's then the last thing is that this only models part of the whole signal. This only assumes propagation on the line, so that is not really representative. So let's briefly look at the other extreme. So again, we have a fiber that emits the light of the tissue, that collects the light some distance. So a long time ago, in one of the first classes, we talked about diffusion theory and had derived this expression for the reflectance as a function of radial distance. So this is what you would measure if you would put the fiber at a distance rho away from the source. The expression was pretty ugly, but it's in the end, if we looked at all the terms that are in there, we saw that it only contained optical properties. It contains the absorption coefficient here, and it contains the reduced scattering coefficient. Do you remember what reduced scattering coefficient is? It's been a long time, so I don't blame you if you don't. That was US prime. That's the US itself times 1 minus the opposite. So that goes in those. Look at plots. So this is reflectance on a logarithmic scale. This is distance on a logarithmic scale. This is what the model. What this model proves. Now we can use that with the function. So the farther you go away, the stronger. What we can do is we can now look back at our single fiber next slide. If we zoom in a little bit on the surface of that fiber, we can try to model reflectance from that as basically having a very mini fiber here that launches the photons and a mini fiber there. That's the photons all over the surface. So by looking at the reflectance as a function of radial distance, where the distances are on my actual fiber surface, we can try to integrate over the area of that fiber. That would mean that we would have to vary the input mini fiber point and the output fiber point, so that would be a double integral over the surface of that the actual fiber, which is very tedious. So a clever way of circumventing that is by looking at the distribution distances rho on the fiber surface, and then integrate over that. This is a nice calculation in itself. The field is called the geometric probability. So it's pretty fun. You can calculate that the distribution of distances on a disk is given by this expression. Which has the radius of the disk, of course. So that means that the reflectance as a function of fiber, the measured reflectance as a function of fiber is then found by using the expression from the previous slide, the reflectance as a function of radial distance, integrated, weighted over the distribution of distances. This reflectance, this is still general. This should work if we have an expression for reflectance as a function greater distance. Then it should give valid results. Now the approach that we took here is to write or to separate the total reflectance into two terms. One term is the diffuse light, for which this first long equation of fiber distance is valid, so in the diffusion theory, and the rest, which we then call semi-ballistic or semi-diffuse or subdifuse. And the idea why we think this is possible is that is again based on Monte Carlo simulations. Numbers of Monte Carlo simulations, where here you see the result in the horizontal axis is US prime times the fiber diameter in that simulation. So fiber diameter here and US prime in the median. And here is the reflectance that is measured. Now, if you look at the Monte Carlos, this is the result. So the gray dots here are the results. But if we weed out the Monte Carlo results, we can only take photons that are scattered 4 times or more, then they end up here on the blue dotted line. So these are this is the Monte Carlo reflectance of photons that are 4 times or more scattered. There we see that that it matches very nicely with the diffusion theory, so the diffusion equation. So for that reason, okay, apparently we can make the separation where this part, this diffusive part, accounts for photons that are scattered 4 times or more, and then we have this other part for the photons that are scattered less. So then the complete model would look like this. So taking the subdiffuse part and the diffuse part, distribution of distances. Now this, for this we can find this results in literature. This part is more or less what we have tried to do today. We summed up to an infinite number of events, but if you start the summations at, let's say, 4 events, then 5 events, then you get the estimate for this. So the whole idea is so this is all still work in progress, but the whole idea is that we can rely on the diffusion theory to calculate this part, and then hopefully based on this modeling that we did today, we can get a valid expression for this part, and then everything should fall into place. But first, let's look at this one. We can specify how we will treat the case, how we will treat absorption, again using random Beers laws. What we assume is that the photons that we detect will have certain path distributions, so distribution lengths. And if there is absorption, then along the Lambert-Beers law applies along each of these lengths. The total reflectance is then the sum over all the possible path lengths, so we integrate it. Now you may recognize this as a form of a Laplace transform. If you encounter these, which is a nice convenience. And the other nice convenience is that Laplace transform has certain properties which we can then take some advantage of. This is the result of the calculation. Just to throw it in place directly. So if we take this diffusion theory, we integrate it over the path distribution, and then the result is of this type. This is the diffusion equation. This is integrated over integrated distances. So it's a beast of a formula, but it's the nice thing is it's an analytic formula, so you can investigate what the different terms do. So let's briefly run through it. We have x in here, which is the product of US and fiber diameter. We have integrals here that unfortunately cannot be expressed analytically and further. So we have to calculate this numerically, but you can do it pretty fast. So that is yeah. So basically this part, these analytic formulas instead of Monte Carlo simulations, which you would have to rerun this calculator. A good thing that is convenient is that it is a function only of this x, only a product of US prime, the optical fiber element to be. So that means that if you have a solution for x, that means that you have a solution for a whole range of optical properties, a whole range of fiber elements, as long as the product of the two is the same. So you can easily predict what will happen if you increase or decrease the fiber element, for example, from these elements. This is then the simulation of comparison with a full double integration where you have different approximations, and it shows that this expression, this independent expression, actually works. That works pretty well with the validate across the other longer methods. So far, it was an absence of absorption, so we can try to factor in absorption the same way as we did before, using the fact that the expression, the integration of the path is a form of Laplace transform. That means it comes with scaling relations. The result of that is that the diffusive patterns will scale in x, which pi times d, but it will also scale in I. Is the ratio of absorption and reduced scattering coefficient. So again, it does not depend on these properties independently, it only depends on the ratio. And the two you can do with you can show, so if we do different combinations of US prime and absorption, as long as the ratio is the same, you will measure the same results. Two different sets of calculations. So again, if you to plot the reflectance as a function of the ratio of UA and US prime, then for these set of parameters, the ratios are the same, so you get the same reflectance. From which you can calculate pattern distributions again in order to estimate how deep the photons are going. This is the pattern distribution that I'm organized US prime. So the same scaling relation means that if you have one pattern distribution, if there is one single pattern distribution as a function of US prime plus L, so this is the result. And if you calculate it for a given value of US prime, you just scale it. You only have to scale the reactions, so you don't have to do calculations. Okay, so then the final result of that is that, for this very simple setup, the modeling is essentially quite complicated. So we split the reflectance in two parts: a subdiffuse part and the diffuse part. So the last part of this presentation dealt with the diffuse part, but we found these. The good thing is we found this convenient scaling relation. So it only depends on the product of US prime and the fiber limit, but it only depends on the ratio of mu and the rest. Now, of course, in the end, what we would like to do is include the subdiffuse part as well. So that will probably be some function of the expression that we had before. But what you see here is that we have, in order to incorporate absorption, we have this albedo alpha here, which you can rearrange this a bit, and then you'll see that this too is only a function of the ratio of mu and so again, here you don't have the individual optical properties that all appear as ratios. All right, that was the. So there's a funny thing that I'm not sure if it's a rule or something or a law. I haven't figured it out yet, but I think there is an inverse relation between how simple the instrument is and how complicated the theory. Because in this case the instrument is really simple, but the theory gets kind of excessive. Whereas in OCT instrument is quite complicated. But the whole signal description is essentially one single exponential decay. And so there the signal description is pretty simple. So
Right, because when you've got simple instruments, you can actually approach it directly.
yeah, in case of OCT, it is in the case. So one. No, I think in this case it has to do with multiple scattering. So for OCT, you have both confolocality and this coherence gating, which allows you to really select photons that have only scattered once. That next to some here, there is no way to suppress the fact that photons are scattered multiple times. And as soon as you go to multiple scattering, it gets really complicated.
We take a step back. How exactly does this like improve over like other imaging techniques? I'm thinking of right. Okay, so we have this multiple scattering and everything. How are we then again getting great images and information on the material?
Well, if you want images,
like a very broad sense, like there's lots of work. So what do we get out of it?
And so if you really want imaging, then probably the best way to do is to try to suppress multiple scattering as much as possible, because then you're sure of the trajectory that the photons have taken. Then you can really map a reflection to a certain location, and that helps you in the image formation. For a technique like this, this is not intended for imaging. This is intended for sensing. It can be beneficial to have. And since the absorption takes place along the path, sometimes it can be beneficial to have longer paths because then you get sufficient contrast in the absorption. So in that case, it can be beneficial to have this multiple scattering, but you have to deal with the fact that the analysis of the signals gets more complicated because the modeling is different. So that is a little bit of the trade-off there. But and also the fact that it's multiple scattering is so different makes it that a lot of these, at least for the sensing methods, are qualitative and not really quantitative. So they measure reflectances as ratios, or as, but really, if you want to, so ultimately, from a physical standpoint, ideally you would measure reflectance really in some physical units, in watts per square meter or something, or. But yeah, for that the modeling of the multiple scattering is really the difficult part and also the challenging part. Okay. Yeah. Then some household. This was the last inhoudelijk lecture that I wanted to tell you. So the last one is it's called wrap up. I'm just looking at you. Do you think it's necessary? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some practice material on a list of the things that I want you to study on Canvas. What my planning to do was Friday is just go through that list with you. But do you think that's necessary, or do you think if I read it online, it's clear enough, then that I can use my time better? So either is fine with me. Of course you can. So I'll try to put it. I'll try to put it on probably tomorrow. So if you can take a look at it before Friday, and then let me know if you think if it's needed to come together. So again, no problem. But if you all think, well, this is good enough for me, then.
Yeah, I guess to me some like general tuning.
Yeah, that's also perfectly fine.
It's a little unfortunate that on Friday morning we got a presentation for FB2P exam stuff. So it's an ideally if it's not the case, that we could like meet up next week, but I mean the exams on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I would have a little more time to go over it on the tour.
Yeah. So we could also schedule it on Monday, but I'm not sure I would. Be really short before the exam, but at least you can. Okay, and then we'll just go through it on Friday. Then
always ask questions on the canvas.
Yeah, that's true. But the only thing is, so if only one or two people show up on Friday, then it's a little bit. That's why I'm asking. But okay, so but let's say we'll just be here on Friday, okay? And and if not, let me know.
I also wanted to ask you the second segment.
Yeah.
That it's on Canvas due to this Friday or something.
I'll make that a little bit longer then.
Yeah, because I really studied for next week. The 28th.
Yeah, so if you have, the ultimate deadline is somewhere around, is at the end of the exam. So I'll elongate that a little.
The exam is in this room at 12:15.
Is it in this room? I didn't check that.
That's what I.
It could be, could very well
I'm
be.
not sure. It was on the timetable. but-
Yeah. Okay. Didn't check which room. it was.
Yeah, for assignment two, what do you want us to hand in? Just the generated graphs or is this